WisconsinEye's Campaign 2024 programming is sponsored by Wisconsin Counties Association, Nicolet National Bank, Wisconsin Hospital Association, Operating Engineers Local 139, the Wisconsin Realtors Association, the Wisconsin Laborers District Council, and North Central State's Regional Council of Carpenters. To support programs like this, please consider a tax-deductible donation at wiseye.org/donate or by texting WisCI to 44321.
Erik Olsen of Madison is the Republican candidate for the 2nd Congressional District. The election is November 5th. Erik Olsen, welcome to WisconsinEye.
Well, thank you. It's great to be on WisconsinEye.
Thank you for participating in our candidate interviews. I'll start with asking you, why are you running for this office? How would you describe your campaign's key message?
Our key message is that we are in a very bad place in this country right now, and we need to take some very concerted action to turn things around. And our campaign is part of that. My wife and I both believe that the country is really headed in the wrong direction under the Democrat leadership that we have in Washington right now. And if we don't do something about it, we're at a real risk for losing a lot of the liberties and, really the prosperity and the freedom that we've grown accustomed to in this country. So we're doing what we can to put the country back on track, and hopefully it works.
Maybe you've already answered this, but what do you consider to be the most pressing challenge before the country? And then what specific action are you planning to take if you're elected to Congress?
Well, there's so many terrible problems going on right now. We have a bloody war going on between Ukraine and Russia that never should have happened, and that there never would have been an invasion at all if Donald Trump had been in office, or really for that matter, if any strong leadership had been in office, if there had been a strong Democrat in office or a strong Republican in office.
Would you stop funding to Ukraine?
Oh, I don't think you can do that at this point. Unfortunately, we're deep in a morass here, but probably over 1 million people have lost their lives there. Many hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians and Russians too. They're also people. They also have their families, and it's really all due to the United States' lack of strong leadership in the world. So, I would do everything I could to encourage bringing an end to that war in a just manner, so that the dying can stop. And of course, we have to do something about our border. The border is wide open, and it's completely unfair to working people and to middle-class American families and people of lesser means. And it's actually very unfair to the people who are coming in as well. A lot of times they're trafficked for labor, and a lot of times they're trafficked for even worse things than that. There's an incredible amount of sex trafficking that goes on, and we think that nobody knows who's coming in over the border. There's people who know. It's called the cartels, because they're the ones often charging people $10,000 or more to smuggle them in, and then they hold them in debt bondage, which is essentially like slavery, and make them do often inhuman things to pay off their cartel creditors, if you want to call it that. That needs to stop.
We'll talk a little bit more about immigration in a little bit. I want to ask you about the economy. How do you see the state of the economy, and what legislation or policy, if any, would you propose to incentivize economic growth, specifically here in Wisconsin?
Specifically here in Wisconsin? Well, I think that we have to understand that we live in a global economy. We live in, a national economy. So a lot of the problems that we're experiencing here in Wisconsin right now are actually due to federal mismanagement of the monetary policy and really pretty much everything else. So we have horrible inflation going on right now. And for many of the people who live here in Madison, and many of the people who I know, and actually myself included really, we don't feel the full brunt of it because we are privileged people. We are people who are paid very well and often have very comfortable jobs and very comfortable existences. But there are a lot of people and families who have budgeted and who understood that the promise that the leadership of this country had implicitly made to them was to have a responsible fiscal policy. So suddenly when they cannot afford their groceries, in some cases they have to be late on their home payments, and their credit card debt is higher and higher every month, that's a broken promise to those families.
So would your action in Congress be to curtail spending? Is that what you're saying?
Well, we obviously have to curtail spending, and we have to get the inflation under control, and we have to get the debt under control. And actually a key component of that is we have to take very strong action to get American people and American families and American children healthy again, because we are spending a tremendous amount of money treating sickness and illness that doesn't have to happen. We have obesity rates that in some places approach 40%. Obesity is one of the leading causes of disease. We have to get America healthy again. We have to get America out of the grip of companies that make enormous profits selling ultra-processed food that's unhealthy, not nutritious. We need to make sure that families and children have yummy, nutritious, organic food, and they can grow up and their families can own houses and they can live the American dream. And it's Congress's job to make sure that that's happening just as much as it's the president's job.
You mentioned inflation. Prices are high, but however, inflation appears to be stabilizing. Still, again, prices above pre-pandemic rates. What, if any, is the role of Congress in keeping the cost of goods and services low?
Well, okay. If you believe that prices are stabilizing and that inflation has stopped, I would submit to you that you are living about as privileged an existence as I'm living, which is a very privileged existence. Because for the people who who actually work, and the people who have calluses on their hands, and the people who, have planned it out penny by penny, which is actually what a lot of our families did when we were kids. I believe that in the 48 years that I've been on the earth, we've become so affluent in this country, and so many of us have become so affluent that we've forgotten what it was like to say, okay, if we're going to drive over there, that's how much the gas is going to cost, and people had everything metered out really, really pretty much to the dollar to run a budget in the household.
Are there specific areas of government spending that you think need to be reduced? Federal government spending? Well,
for one thing, we send blank check after blank check to soak the soil of Ukraine in blood. How responsible is that? And then government has to do what every household in America at least used to do, and probably to some degree still does, which is sit down together in a collaborative way and say, hey, we may have some disagreements on certain things, but we all agree on many things. We can't keep running up a debt that's trillions and trillions of dollars higher every year. We have to figure out a way to rein it in. And reining it in will reduce the monetary supply, and that will naturally bring down inflation after a while. As much as I hate to say it, some programs may need to be cut.
Is there an example of a program that should be cut?
One example is Social Security, and I would increase Social Security for people who are on it right now, because I believe we have made promises to our seniors, and right now their payments are not even keeping up with inflation.
What reforms?
But I would raise the age at which people can take it, so that people my age, I'm 48 right now, people my age would understand that unless we get our house in order, we are not going to be able to take those benefits to a later age. And that would be a strong incentive for people my age to say, let's figure out a way to make this work so we can bring that age back down. I don't know. I'm not an economist.
But higher than it is today.
Well, it's going to have to be, because you can talk to people who are trained in economics. I'm not a plumber either, but I know how to fix a leak if it happens in the house. I'm not a roofer, but if the water's coming in through the roof, I know how to talk to enough professionals and talk to other people to make sure who's good at what they do, and then you hire the right person and you get the job done. Congress needs to do that. I can't sit here and tell you exactly the economic policy or the age. Well, I think the concept of raising the age so that people my age they don't have a broken promise. We cannot break our promises to the people who are taking it right now or who are near taking it. It has to be with enough time so that people can plan and also have an incentive to get the house in order. Because, look, if I know, for example, people in my age cohort know, hey, if we don't start doing something better, we're not going to be able to get Social Security until much later. Guess what? People might start paying more attention and being more engaged in the political process, finding numerous places where we can cut the budget, making sure that America becomes healthy again so that we can stop spending so much on medicine, and quite frankly, so it will get rid of a lot of suffering. Nobody wants to be sick.
I want to ask you about child care. We'll also talk more about health care in a bit. It's become increasingly expensive to raise a family. What are some examples of policies you support that make raising a family more affordable? For instance, do you support a child tax credit, and in what form would that be, or other policies that reduce the cost of child care specifically?
Well, I'll tell you something. I was very fortunate to be raised, at least for most of my young life, in a family where we had one parent who stayed home and raised my sister and myself. And it's very sad that we've come to a place in this country where for families to just get by, they basically have to have two parents working. And again, that's not for people like you or people like myself, who I assume live in a level of privilege that we probably could have one wage earner. But we need to get back to an America where all of those families that would like to can have one wage earner and one parent taking care of the kid.
Are there policies that get closer to that vision?
Well, there's many. For one thing, bringing manufacturing back to the United States. For one thing, putting tariffs on foreign countries that exploit slave labor to make goods. I mean, we for a long time, and this is one of the things that I find so abhorrent about the Democrat Party, is that they say that they're the party of labor. They're not the party of labor. They're the party that has sold working people out time and time again because they make some laws and provide some protections, and that's all well and good. But then they allow the jobs to trickle off overseas so that the goods and in some cases even the services are being provided in a foreign country, and a lot of times without any protections for those workers. So what protections do the Uyghurs have over in China, who are being brutally exploited by the Chinese Communist Party? And then we have American corporations harvesting the profits. So we sit around and down at UW-Madison and many other places, and I'm a graduate of there. I have a great deal of pride in that institution, but talk about, the problems created by slavery, as though that were a thing in the past. Not only is slavery happening right now, but much of that slave labor is going into the bottom line of American corporations. That needs to stop. And bringing that manufacturing and those good, high-paying jobs back to the United States will do a long... Well, of course, because then you have one parent who can stay home and raise the kids.
I want to ask you about housing. And cost of housing is another issue for Wisconsinites. Is there any federal policy or legislation that you would support that would lower the cost of housing, either for renters or home buyers? Some of the presidential candidates have some proposals out there. Is there anything that you support?
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting problem. You know, I know a fair amount about housing prices, being involved in property law. I'm a lawyer. We have a little small boutique law firm, and we do property rights litigate. A lot of that actually is due to inflation to a certain degree, because even just the cost of building materials went so high that it's no longer feasible to build a house for anything.
Do you support a subsidy for first-time home buyers, or additional money from the federal government to build affordable homes?
I think the federal government really needs to back off in a lot of these things, because the problem is a lot of times you try to fix a problem and it actually exacerbates the problem in ways that you never expected, because you provide a subsidy and now people can pay more for the houses, and that actually makes it. What we have to somehow do is quite possibly start allowing the construction of smaller homes. I mean, it's very interesting that in many places in Wisconsin, you can't even build a house below a certain size. You couldn't even maybe build a 600 square foot house or something like that. No, I don't think it's deregulation. I would call it more common sense regulation, because they say, oh, well, that's an unfit size for a house in Wisconsin or something like that. But then you go to New York City and you look on the app on your phone and you see that for that same square foot size apartment in New York City to buy, or a condo to buy that, it's $2 million. So it can't possibly be inhuman for the people to live. Now, we want to make sure that everybody lives in a decent sort of a situation. So I think that allowing perhaps well, one thing we hear about is tiny homes. I mean, everybody has to have a house. I think we have to, and it reduces the carbon footprint as well.
You talked a bit about healthcare as a priority for you. Medical systems are facing numerous headwinds in the form of inflation, workforce development, and issues around Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement, resulting in fewer services, and in Wisconsin, even the closure of a medical system on the west side of the state. What would you do to preserve access to care and prevent future closures in Wisconsin?
That is a very, very good question, because we have a lot of problems, both with healthcare being really kind of unaffordable for a lot of people. Even the deductibles, that a lot of people pay through the Affordable Care Act are very high for many people to deal with.
And what's the answer?
Well, the answer is you've got to, and again, as I said, I'm not a plumber, I'm not an economist, and I'm certainly not a doctor. I don't even play one on TV, not even on WisconsinEye. But what we have to do is we have to get a group of people together, and they have to be thoughtful people. They have to be people who are going to start telling us how we can get America healthier again so that people need fewer medical services, and we have to make sure that we have ways that those services can be provided so that people don't go broke. I think
Should Medicare be able to negotiate for lower prescription drug prices?
Of course.
Local government. Local communities in Wisconsin are faced with a growing number of issues. For example, issues related to water quality, PFAS, or a sudden influx of refugees like Wisconsin saw in 2021. How do you plan to collaborate with local governments if you're elected to ensure that they have the necessary resources for those types of local issues?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, I do believe that a lot of the solutions to the problems that are facing this country today come from two things. First of all, people themselves understanding that in the United States of America, the actual sovereign is we the people. The sovereign means the king or the queen, the person in charge. The person in charge is you and me, we the people. Not me as a candidate, not me as potentially a congressperson, but me as one of the people. And so being the sovereign entails a certain amount of responsibility. And one of the things that I've made, and really a driving motivation of this political campaign is to say, let's get engaged. Even if someone is not necessarily going to end up in a job in Congress, even if someone is not necessarily even running for any office, we have to all get engaged. We have to figure out what is going to work in each local situation, and it may be different from one locale to another. I don't think it's fair to, I'm not saying this to you, but in a general sense, I don't think it's necessarily the same refugee problem that we have everywhere. Different places have different issues that they're facing. In some places, people who have come...
Would you commit to getting more resources to local governments that had these types of unique challenges?
No, because I don't think just throwing money at every single problem is the way to fix it. I think that that's what's gotten us in a situation where a lot of times everybody is just looking for more grant money. I think the best solutions involve people getting engaged and local governments getting engaged and figuring out the solution for them, and perhaps federal money in the appropriate situations. But what I've seen is a lot of times where federal or state government creates programs and they're going to incentivize this or that. Well, really what it does is it creates a class of very clever and very good grant writers, and a lot of times the situation persists and persists and persists. How much money have we thrown at homelessness and it's still going on? How much money have we thrown at cancer and it's still going on?
I want to talk about taxes. You mentioned your support for tariffs on foreign goods. Are other tax cuts or increases a focus of your campaign?
Well, I mean, in general, I think that we need to work on reducing taxes.
Across the board, all income levels?
No. I think it has to be done in a very thoughtful manner. And I think people come on a show like this, or they run for a position of some sort, and then they make some kind of a bombastic it's a complex situation. And, some income levels may be okay at their tax rate right now. In other situations, it may not be. One example that I can give you is certainly for older people and people on a fixed income, it is very unfair to be increasing their property taxes year after year. It is totally egregious in my mind that any person should be pushed out of their home in the city of Madison because they can't afford the property taxes anymore.
Should there be a federal abortion policy passed by Congress?
No.
It shouldn't be a national abortion policy. You support deciding at the state level?
Yes.
Okay. What's your position on climate change, and what congressional actions do you support that balance environmental and economic concerns with economic growth and job creation?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because at some point in time it became almost a forbidden topic to debate climate change. And I think that's a real shame, because anytime that speech is squelched or impinged upon, we actually lose a lot of the beautiful resource we have in the United States, which is that we do have freedom of speech and freedom of debate.
Do you think we need to take action on climate change? And if so, like what congressional policies?
We definitely need to take some kind of an action, to clean things up, because, for example, I don't remember what year it was, but on this, we used to have a problem with acid rain. Okay, that's largely been mitigated. We used to, at least it's better. We probably still have a problem to some degree. We used to have an enormous problem with ozone, right? And through a series of measures that was decreased. Right now, what I see, I guess I'll just say this, is I see a lot of money getting spent that is supposedly going to help something with climate change, and I don't think it's going to help anything. I think it's just graft.
Renewable energy development?
I support working renewable energy development. I don't support shoveling endless amounts of money to projects that are essentially white elephants, and a lot of them have ended up being that. In particular, some of the wind projects are not producing the forecasted amounts of energy. We've spent tons of taxpayer money, and now we have a boondoggle, so to speak. And what's even more concerning is when we buy some of these materials for some of these so-called green projects from China, and then we find out that the materials or the metals that were needed for this project were mined by people essentially in almost a slave labor situation, and that a lot of them are sick and their bodies are contaminated and their children are sick. So how green was that?
How should the U.S. be balancing support for Israel with concerns over civilian casualties in Gaza in the Israel-Hamas war?
Well, I am a 100% clear and absolute supporter of the state of Israel. And Israel not only has a right to defend itself, Israel has a right to win. And do you know what the word proxy means?
What does winning mean? How far should Congress go in their support for Israel? Should there be conditions?
It is a very sad thing. Well, of course. We can't just idiotically spend enormous amounts of money for bloodshed. And again, if President Trump had been in office, or a strong Democrat or a strong leader of any type, we wouldn't have had that happen on October 7th. But just so you understand, what happened on October 7th was not that the Palestinian people attacked Israel. Hamas, which is a proxy, which means a part of Iran, attacked. And Iran is in league with China, which is in league with Russia, and they're in a sort of an alliance against America. America's ally is Israel, and we have some other allies as well. So it was Israel that was to a certain extent attacked, but really it was a direct attack on us and our interests. Israel, have you been to Israel?
I have not.
You should go to Israel. Israel is a beautiful, wonderful, democratic place. I've been all over the world, and one of the places where you can really sense and feel and smell freedom is in Israel. Israel is a place where you can say almost anything you want to say without fear of being dragged off by the police or some sort of something bad happening.
Complete support for Israel to win this war. I need to keep us moving. Are you
keep us moving.
Are you troubled by the record-breaking amounts of out-of-state money being solicited by Wisconsin campaign operatives to influence our local elections?
Well, if there wasn't so much money involved in political campaigns, I would have a much better chance of winning. I'll tell you that. And actually, I do think that if we could get back to a place where there was less money spent on politics, or actually where money was spent on politics, but it came from the constituents of a certain area who were donating, I think that well, I don't know, because the problem is you run into situations where everything you do to try to regulate something ends up having an unintended effect. So
a lot of that money, out-of-state money, is going to stream negative attack ads, many of which walk that fine line between accuracy and exaggeration. At a time when the nation is so divided, how would you respond to a Wisconsin voter who would ask you to promise not to run negative ads?
If everyone else is going to stop, then of course someone can stop. Well, doesn't it have to be? Because that's the old thing of saying, will you, you're going to be in a boxing match, but will you promise
It's
not
gotta
to?
be fair.
Well, doesn't it have to be fair?
You talked a little bit about this. The number of Wisconsin school districts going to referendum asking local taxpayers for funding is increasing. Is there a need to increase federal funding on K-12 public education?
Well, okay, so often with education, the federal money comes with many strings attached. And in fact, the number one thing that I think that we need to do for education is to start returning control of the classrooms to the classroom teachers and to the parents. I think up through a very long part of our history, even at a time in our history when kids were learning in one-room schools, which we used to have many of throughout here in Wisconsin. You can still drive around and see them on the corners of town roads in different places. People were finishing that schooling with the ability to think critically and the ability to read and the ability to write. And when we see kids finishing high school right now without the ability to read and the ability to think critically, actually going back to your point about a negative attack ad, that makes that ad all the more troubling, because when you have somebody who's been trained to think critically, they can see through that and they can say, okay, I see what this person is doing.
So less regulation and requirements in education?
I feel like you keep trying to say that I'm in favor of less regulation, but I'm not necessarily. I'm just saying that we can't necessarily go trying to throw money at every single problem, and we have to gently and in a collaborative and responsible way work towards returning more control over education to the local level.
Do you support federal student loan forgiveness?
In certain cases, yes. I think that if someone goes and serves in our military and had a student loan and then they enlist and then they go and, the thing that every parent worries about happens and their child is wounded, maybe badly wounded, and now they're back and they're trying to recover, don't we as a society owe it to that person to forgive their loan that after they went out and put their life on the line to protect us? And then we have many other circumstances that go to something that I would never approve of. I don't think that just a blanket forgiving all the student loans makes any sense, because what about the people who paid for it? What about those parents who are the middle-class parents or the people of lesser means who I was talking about, who made that budget and saved up a little bit every month, and then they were so proud when they had the money to send their child to school, and now the other family that lived, let's say less responsibly, or maybe they didn't even have the opportunity to do that, but they have the forgiveness and the other one doesn't. That makes no sense. That makes no common sense at all. That's the loopiest thing I've ever heard.
You mentioned concern around the border. What would you focus on in an effort to fix what many feel is a broken immigration system? What's the one thing you'd focus on? Is it asylum? Is it sending undocumented immigrants back?
Well, that's like saying, the house is on fire, and if you had to put out the fire in one room, which one would it be? You got to deal with the whole situation.
The whole thing.
I know a lot about immigration. I actually, at the beginning of my legal career, I practiced a little bit of immigration law, and the system is totally Byzantine, and it doesn't work very well. We need people to come here. We are a country of immigrants, and so we need an immigration system whereby good people who want to come here and want to participate can come in a way that doesn't ruin the livelihood of people. So, for example, let's say somebody's a roofer. It's not fair to suddenly let in all these people and suddenly they can't get a job because they're being undercut on every single bid. That's not fair. So there has to be an immigration system of common sense that works. If we had people working across the aisle, it wouldn't be hard to do. And I would be one of the people to reach across the aisle, get everybody together and say, folks, we got to fix this.
It's a priority issue.
Well, it's probably, aside from the war that's potentially lurching us towards World War III that nobody seems remotely concerned about as much as they should be, it's perhaps one of the top 3 issues right now.
What's the biggest difference between you and your opponent?
Everything.
Everything.
Well, that's probably an unfair thing to say, because, the thing I've actually noticed in politics is that people on different sides of the aisle actually agree in some ways on very much more than what we disagree about. And so, I'm sure on many issues you'd find that almost everybody in this country, at least on paper, agrees. But take freedom of speech. I feel that the government right now has basically gotten themselves, under the Biden-Harris administration, has gotten themselves deeply involved in the censorship industrial complex. And where was my opponent holding them accountable? I don't know. Maybe he was. Maybe he can point to a place and say, I was speaking truth to power. I held them accountable. And I would say, okay, good for you. I didn't hear it.
Final question for you. Given the steep national partisan divide, as you've just mentioned, what is one issue you think has potential to be resolved that would bring the parties together?
The Ukraine war should be resolved right away. There's no reason that all those families should be having a loved one dead or wounded, their houses broken, their kids sent off to fight in a meat grinder that looks like it was World War I. That should have been resolved a long time ago. There should be a robust national debate going on why is there a war? Why are we throwing fuel on the fire by sending them check after check for billions of dollars and ever increasingly sophisticated equipment to kill each other with? That's got to stop. And the border should be fixed. Those are two issues. Those are two issues that should be easy for everybody to come together on and say, these are things, although we may disagree, we may really fight it out on a whole number of issues, these are ones that we should all be able to agree on. So, I mean, that's like, at least in theory, that should be the low-hanging fruit. But it isn't, because the train's off the rails. So I would be part of getting the train back on the rails, getting people working together, and providing the people the common sense solutions to the problems that they so desperately want. We want solutions. I'm actually a person. I want solutions. I am part of We the People, and I am not happy with how things are going right now.
Well, thank you, Erik Olsen from Madison, the Republican candidate for the 2nd Congressional District. The election is November 5th. Erik Olsen, thank you for talking with WisconsinEye.
It's been a pleasure to be here.
This programming is brought to you by our generous sponsors. Thank you for watching.